So tell us a little bit more about the focus of your doctoral research. I know it was on the Psalms, but what did you do with the Psalms?
Sure. I was thinking about the language of memory in the context of prayer. So the title was Prayers for Remembering in the Psalms.
Okay.
So in that I was exploring how the Psalms are both prayers about remembering God or asking God to remember us, but also prayers that have been handed down through centuries, through so many different generations in so many different lands. And so the tradition there is about how the Psalms are remembered and why they're remembered. Thinking a bit about how I went about that, I used some linguistic methods. So I had two supervisors, John Barton in Old Testament, who was fabulous, and then someone I met in linguistics through Jesus College, through the senior common room. The joy of Oxford colleges and how they can help in that way. David Cram, a linguistics supervisor, was fabulous in bringing to my attention other kind of ways and means of analysing text.
How did you get interested in remembering in the Psalms? Why remembering? Those Psalms are full of themes, but why that in particular?
Well, I started with the remembering actually. When I was studying Hebrew at Cambridge, we were looking at the Joseph narratives in the book of Genesis, and I remember learning from my tutor there that the Hebrew zachar is when it's used of the cupbearer. The cupbearer who gets out of prison does not remember Joseph, but forgets him. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't think of him at all. It's just he didn't do anything about him. So I was really fascinated by the very physical, effective kind of nuance of the Hebrew. And I wanted to know in the first instance to what extent this might play out throughout the Bible. I wanted to know to what extent that might influence our understandings of the Eucharist. Do this in remembrance of me, or Paul's letters, I remember you in my prayers, How does that all sort of fit together? I started thinking, therefore, across the entire Bible about the language of remembering. And then it seemed natural to narrow that down to a sort of remembering in prayer, remembering in spirituality. So I analysed, I did a pan-biblical survey of language for remembering in the context of prayer in the Bible, which, as you can imagine, was pretty massive. And then, of course, you get to that stage where you need to narrow down your doctoral research. And it became perfectly clear that the best place to discover those kind of texts was, of course, the Book of Psalms. So that's where that was the point at which I truly became an Old Testament person, rather than still trying to be both Old and New Testament.